Hi, my name is Sarah Patricia. I'm a third semester architecture student, and in this video, I'll present my analysis of Edificio Ermita in Mexico City using Francis G.K. Ching's book Architecture, Form, Space, and Order as my main theoretical guide. From my perspective, Edificio Ermita is much more than a famous corner with a Coca-Cola sign. It's a key example of the Mexican Art Deco style and of how architecture can organize an entire piece of city life in vertical layers. In this presentation, I will connect what we learned in our class with Ching's ordering principles, axis, symmetry, hierarchy, rhythm, and transformation applied specifically to this building. On this slide, I want to briefly mention Edificio Ermita and its context. Edificio Ermita was designed by architect Juan Segura Gutierrez and built between 1930 and 1933 in Tacubaya neighborhood of Mexico City, at the intersection of Avenida Revolución, Progreso, y Jalisco. From what we learned in class and our team monography, this corner was becoming a very active node in the city, and the building responded with a mixed-use program that combined shops, a cinema, and apartments stacked vertically. From my point of view, this is important because it shows how Mexican architecture was moving from a more traditional horizontal city to a modern vertical lifestyle. The Art Deco style, with its geometric lines and careful ornament, expresses the optimism of post-revolutionary Mexico and its desire to project a modern identity while still being connected to local culture. Now I'll move on to the first Ching concept, axis. On the left side of the slide, you can see Ching's example of an axial space, where an invisible line organizes the composition and guides movement. On the right side, if we look at Edificio Ermita, analyzing the plans and the photos, the most powerful axis is the vertical one at the rounded corner. When I annotated this image, I highlighted how the corner tower works as a spine. The windows and balconies stack along this line, and the signage area reinforces it. From the street, the eye naturally flows this access from the pedestrian level up to the top of the building. Relating this to our class, I see how Segura uses the axis not only as a formal device, but also as a way to negotiate a very complex triangular lot. The vertical axis stabilizes the irregular footprint, so even though the site is sharp and dynamic, the building still feels ordered and legible, just as Ching describes an axis as a tool to organize space. The second concept is symmetry. Ching explains symmetry as balance around an axis where elements on both sides correspond in size and position. From what we observed during the monograph work, Edificio Ermita shows a strong visual symmetry when you look at the main facades. If I draw a central line over the image, you can see how the windows, balconies, and floor levels mirror each other on both sides. For me, the symmetry feels like a calm heartbeat for the building, or a regular, predictable, and reassuring pace. In class, we discussed how symmetry often communicates stability and formality. I believe that is exactly what happens here. Even though there's an intersection around Ermita is very noisy and chaotic, the symmetrical facades create a sense of order. For residents and passersby, that regular rhythm of openings makes the building easy to understand and maybe even comforting, which connects directly with the idea of architecture providing psychological stability in the city. The third principle I chose is hierarchy. In Ching's framework, hierarchy is about giving more importance to one element through size, shape, or position so that it stands out within a system. In the case of Edificio Ermita, from my perspective, the clearest hierarchical move is again at the corner. The rounded tower is taller than the rest of the volume, and the setbacks create a stepped profile that emphasizes this vertical piece. When I notated the image, I marked how the base is more horizontal and human scaled, with shops and entrances, while the tower rises above as an exceptional element. The hierarchy transforms the building into a clear urban landmark. What we learned in our class is that modern architecture often had to negotiate new forms of mobility and scale. Here, the tower signals the crossing of important avenues and becomes a reference point in the urban network, relating it to the competency of systems thinking. We can say that the tower is not only a formal choice, it interacts with traffic flows, commercial activity, and the perception of neighborhood as a gateway to the city. The fourth principle is rhythm. Ching defines rhythm as the repetition of elements that creates a visual pulse similar to music. Looking closely at Edificio Ermita, the rhythm appears in the sequence of windows, balcony rails, and vertical pilasters. When this is drawn over the facade, you can observe how these elements repeat at regular intervals, both horizontally and vertically. From my experience working with the team, we notice that this rhythm never becomes monotonous because the curved corner slightly changes the perception and the shadows and the ornament make the pattern feel alive. In the context of Art Deco, this rhythm is very characteristic. It reinforces the vertical thrust and expresses movement, almost like the city itself is flowing through the building. Additionally, this rhythmic reading helped me diagnose how the facade manages light, views, and privacy for many different users stacked in the same structure. The fifth concept I selected is transformation. In Ching's book, transformation describes how a basic form can be modified by addition, subtraction, or deformation, while still preserving its identity. From my perspective, if you admit that, it's a perfect case of transformation because it takes what could have been a simple rectangular block and adapts it to a very challenging triangular site. If you imagine an initial rectangle and then you see how the corner is rounded and the volume is carved with setbacks, you can almost trace the transformation process step by step. In my annotations, I sketched over the image the original form, then showed how the architect subtracts and curves parts of it. This relates directly to what we studied in class about modern Mexican architecture. Segura is not copying a European Art Deco building and pasting it onto Tacubaya, the streets of Mexico City. Instead, he's transforming it, and he transforms the language to respond to the local topography, culture, street intersection, and program. From what we explored in our monograph, this transformation helps resolve structural loads, generate more corner apartments with views, and visually soften the aggressive angle of the lot. For me, this is where Ching's abstract diagrams become truly concrete and alive in a real project. To close this presentation, I want to reflect briefly on what this exercise meant for me as a third semester architecture student. From my perspective, working with James Feinberg and on Edificio Ermita changed the way I read buildings. At the beginning of the semester, I mostly saw facades as images. Through our team monograph and now this individual analysis, I learned to translate what I see into concepts such as axis, symmetry, hierarchy, rhythm, and transformation. It feels like learning a new language to describe space. The hardest part of following Ching's methodology was forcing myself to choose and prioritize. Animate has many possible readings, space, function, structure, but for this evidence, I needed to focus on the five ordering principles and build precise arguments for each one. That discipline of selecting, justifying, and annotating is for me directly related to the competence of applying a methodology to diagnose an architectural case, such as this one. Regarding EPA format, the most difficult aspect was maintaining consistency across all figures and references, especially when my references are very different, my sources. For example, I had government archives, an academic book, a digital magazine, and a contemporary architecture website. However, from what we practice in class, I now understand that clear citations are also a part of professional ethics in architecture. They show respect for photographers, institutions, and authors whose work supports our analysis. In terms of systems thinking, this project helped me see Edificio Ermita as a node in a larger network. Historical processes after the Mexican Revolution, philanthropic initiatives like the Mia y Pessoa Foundation, the evolution of vertical housing, and even present-day discussions about preservation and urban renewal. By combining Sheen's diagram with real photographs and contextual research, I could connect variables that at first seemed separate, form, social use, history, and perception, into one coherent narrative. Finally, this last slide shows the references that support my analysis. I'll not read every reference in detail, but I want to emphasize that all of them follow the ABBA 7th edition with hanging indents and the architect's credit fully written in italics for each building image. The first reference is Ching's book, Architecture, Form, Space, and Order, which provided the theoretical diagrams for axis, symmetry, hierarchy, rhythm, and transformation. The next references include historical and contemporary photographs of Edificio Ermita from the Gobierno de la Ciudad de Mexico, Javier Guzmán Urbiola's monograph, and an article by Fernando Alanis in Sopitas, as well as images from marketing. From what we learned in our course, using the structure of evidence is essential for building professional research-based arguments in architecture. It shows how I moved from general theory to a specific case study, then back to a broader understanding of Mexican modern architecture. With this, I conclude my presentation on Edificio Ermita's building through the building of Edificio. With this, I conclude my presentation on Edificio Ermita through Ching's Guide. Thank you very much for your attention.